Quad66. Okay, last but not least, at least in this batch, is this LDARC motor. So it's an 1103 7800 kV motor. And I kind of got interested in it because I sort of remembered an old forum post where people had really liked this motor. This motor, I believe, was made by, or still is made by Sunny Sky. And people just felt it performed really well. I was at that time flying mainly the smaller motors like 1102s and doing a lot of 1S stuff. And so I didn't really think much about it. And for the big test when we did it, I didn't think about it at that time. But then, you know, looking for motors, came back to it. So it's an 1103 motor rated at, you know, they report at 7,800 kV. And it's a fairly cheap motor if you order it, obviously, $9. Takes a little while to ship, but it's not too bad. And you can get it there. So I thought this motor was pretty interesting, and I've been flying it. And I really like how it flies, actually. So I was kind of shocked and disappointed by the test results on it. So the thrust was about where I expected it. This is a pretty punchy motor, and so it's a little bit hard to see, but the LDRC motor is here in red with the blue dots. And it's basically kind of above average, not quite with some of these ringers, but it's up there. It's a pretty punchy, powerful motor. Efficiency, I knew it wasn't great. I didn't think it was quite this bad, but you can see that efficiency-wise, it's pretty low. It's pretty bottom of the barrel. And I knew that because flight times were a little bit shorter, but at the end of the day, the way this thing flew, I figured I'm okay with that, because I think probably what we're going to see is that it tests in terms of having really good step response, and it felt like it was easy to tune, felt like it was controlling the props well. And so at the end of the day, if we have to give up something, give up a little efficiency, a little flight time, I felt like I was generally okay with that. So getting into the further analysis, so in terms of putting this in perspective compared to the other motors, when we look at thrust, here's the LDARC motor, where it's not quite as high as some of these ringer motors. Like this is the Apex 1202.6 motor. Here's your Happy model, the Mamba, and the T motor. But it's more than some of these other motors in terms of like, or it's on par with the, actually a little bit less than the Brother Hobby, but better than like the Flywoo, better than the GEP-RC and the 8,000 kV. Not a little bit less thrust than the 10,000 kV GEP-RC 1202 motor. Efficiency-wise, so it's down here. You know, it's basically as bad, if not worse, than that Flywoo 1103 7,600 kV motor, and nowhere near some of the better motors, and not even really all that good compared to some of the balanced motors. Like this is that AMAX 1103 motor, 7,500 kV, and you can see the LDRC is quite a bit lower. And even less efficiency than the T motor. I was kind of surprised about that, which makes me kind of wonder what would happen if we put the T motors on a quad. Definitely heavier, but I don't know. I'm kind of a little bit more curious about them. So getting into step response. So when we talk about the step response, there's two components to it. One is this gain function. So what we do is we take the motor, start at 10%, bump it up to 30% throttle, and measure what it does. And so the first principal component is this step response, basically a gain function. It basically says, does this motor change a little bit or a lot as it goes up in that step response? The second one is the more interesting one, and probably the one that is theoretically should correlate with how well this motor handles the props. And this is the second principal component. And what you can see here is that it's a basically shows how fast this motor locks in. I refer to it as the lock. So the blue motors here are going to basically ramp up very quickly and then plateau very quickly. And so this is what you want in the blue end here. You want this motor to kind of respond very quickly and then plateau, and so that should give you a good control in terms of good response to the PIDs and things like that. On the other hand, you don't want what's happening in red here, where you kind of respond slowly and then you take a long time to plateau. So what the LDARC motor do, unfortunately, it didn't do what I wanted it to do or what I was expecting it to do. It did have a good gain, step response. And I was actually surprised by this, that the gain on that step response is actually even a little bit more than the T motor. So, thrust-wise, this is good, but it's kind of having a bigger step than some of these motors. Maybe not quite as much as like the 1202.6 Apex motor or that Mamba, and certainly not as much as that Hoppy model motor. So better than average step response, but it totally train wrecked on that lock. So in terms of locking in, this was basically terrible. And when you look at the raw data itself, you can kind of see this, and this really surprised me because this is pretty discordant from what I feel in the air. And even objectively, not just what I feel, but the black box too. So I've got a couple examples here to compare. So I've got the LDARC motor, some black box logs from it, and then I've got the Gemfan 1202 motor, 8000 kV, and some examples of how this does look like it controls the prop. So in green here is the set point. In blue is what the gyro actually does. And you can see that this LDARC motor, very quick to respond, stays pretty parallel on this upslope, hardly overshoots at all, and then locks in nice, and then comes back down on the backside. To get the same kind of slope and locking in up here on the Gemfan motor, I had to do what you sometimes have to do with sort of weaker motors, is you basically have to tolerate some overshoot, and you have to tolerate a slight bit of ringing up here to get that crisp response. And so basically on that Gemfan motor, I had to push the P term up. So you're using the feed forward, and on top of that you're throwing in some P to kind of clean up this little gap here. But it's that P term that kind of comes in, pushes late, that drives that overshoot. So the feed forward, without the P term being high, this feed forward wouldn't really cause the overshoot. But then without the P term, this doesn't come up, doesn't lock in, and then you get this like kind of some weird slow oscillations. And so with the Gemfan motor, really what I have to do is I have to push the P term and tolerate a little bit of fast ringing up here, a little fast oscillation, which you can't see or hear. But the reason you have to do that is so that you can lock in, or as best as possible, lock in the little twitch moves. And we'll find these down here in the log. So with these twitch moves, what you want is you want it to respond quick, and then also come back down really quick. And you can see on this Gemfan motor, this is pretty good. And maybe there's still some work I can do. Maybe I can get this a little closer. But you can see it's very well. This is, I mean, compared to some other, just a year ago what I was flying, this is great. This looks good compared to what I was flying, just a year ago. But I'll show you what the LDARC motor does. When we do look at these similar kind of twitch responses, like this is like locked in. There's maybe a tiny hint of overshoot here, but it's, the green and blue lines. So our set point in green and our gyro in blue, these are, this gyro is just following that set point amazingly. And so, and just look at that. That's absolutely beautiful. These are some of the best traces I've seen out of these micros. It's just beautiful. It's really good. So why didn't we get the test results to sort of support that or make it seem like it? I don't know. I can't fully explain that. I'm kind of to some degree wondering if either maybe the motor that Karl Pablo tested, maybe it was a bad motor, maybe it was just a poor example. Maybe there's something about the interplay between the ESC and the motor. For example, I'm flying on 48 kilohertz on these. Maybe with the Gemfan motor with the 1202, if we push this 24 kilohertz, we're going to get a little more punch out of that motor, and maybe we don't have to push the P, and maybe this locks in a little bit better. But whatever happened, it happened, and I'm not one to dismiss data like, I think this is pretty good, data, whatever whatever's happening here. I'm not going to like totally brush it aside. And so that's kind of why I'm still not necessarily for me personally on the hunt for motors, because I'm pretty happy with the way the LDARC is, and testing, you know, is what it is. It feels good in the air to me, and I like it. But I'm still in sort of like the hunt for the ideal 2S, you know, 65 millimeter prop motor. In terms of what this looks like then on our radar chart, so we kind of look at the performance of these motors overall. In black, I have our benchmark motor, that's that AMAX 1103. In red, I put up here the GetBar-C 1202, the 8000 kV version. And you can see overall, you know, the AMAX is a very balanced motor. Likewise, the GetBar-C is also has a little bit better lightness. The GetBar-C gives up a little bit of thrust, but it's got better efficiency and it locks in well. On this testing, the LDARC motor, you know, weight's pretty good. It's a little bit lighter actually than the AMAX motor. It's got a little better thrust than the AMAX motor, and I do think that's true. You know, from flying these in the air, it does feel like it's got more punch. If anything in the air, I think that this underrepresents the thrust. And it doesn't surprise me that the efficiency is down. That I kind of expected. You know, my flight times were definitely down. But this is the one that really, I would have really expected that this was going to be up here and locking in well and locking in better, but it didn't at the end of the day. You know, I basically feel like this motor flies like that Brother Hobby motor. I'm just going to throw that one up there because I think that the Brother Hobby motor is like, that's the motor that we should all strive to be. You know, that's the one. Like, why'd they stop making that? That's painful to me. So, you know, this Brother Hobby motor, maybe not the most durable thing on the planet, but it was light, really good thrust, didn't give up. It gave up some efficiency, but not a ton. But it locked in beautifully, had a nice step response, and so I know we can get there. But I don't know. I'm just kind of beating that dead horse, I guess, at this point. So at the end of the day, I still think the LDARC, my even objective like black box data looks good. My subjective flying, I think the motor flies great. And I think the main thing is the efficiency. But at the same time, I'd like a motor that could also prove that in the testing also. Like, I wish it didn't do this weird stuff, because I'm worried maybe if you have a different ESC or you're running 24 kilohertz or something like that, maybe it does go wrong. Maybe it doesn't fly well for you. But, you know, I can't really change the motor. So this is what we saw on the test. All right. Until next time, cheers.